And now we continue to deprogram Victocrats. Here's Larry Elder.
888-971-SAGE, 888-971-7243. Later on this hour, we're going to talk about Stephen Miller squaring off against CNN. It was a fair fight. Now, as you know, I am a big proponent of school choice. I've been writing about it for decades. And if you want to learn more about what's happening on this front in your own state, go to educationfreedomusa.com. There's a map there that will let voters know which states have universal education freedom and which don't, which my guest and I are going to be talking about in just a second. There's a letter there ready to go to your state lawmakers to make education universal freedom a reality in your state. Again, educationfreedomusa.com, educationusafreedom.com. My guest is the education chair on the Job Creators Network Foundation Board. Please welcome back to the program, Mr. Chip Rogers.
Larry, good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Chip, good to be with you too. I am a massive proponent of school choice. I've seen the progress. I've seen the dismal education that kids are getting K through 12 in urban America, where a substantial number of kids cannot read, write, or compute at grade level. I think I read recently in Baltimore, just to pick one city, 13 public high schools, Chip, all located in the inner city. 0% of the kids can do math at grade level.
Yeah, it's staggering. But you know what's interesting about this, Larry? This is an American principle that has been around since our founding. In fact, John Adams once said that an educated society is much less expensive than an uneducated society. So since day one of our founding, that we have decided as Americans that we're willing to invest in education. But the real question is, do we allow the decision on how and where a child is to be educated be based on their U.S. postal mailing address, where they live? Or do we allow that decision to be based on what their parents believe is the best educational setting for that particular child? And so this is really a simple question. I've dealt with a lot of public policy questions in my career. None are as easy as this. Give parents and children freedom, and education will improve, no question about it.
You know, Chip, what I don't understand is you look at polls, Black parents living in the inner city, Hispanic parents living in the inner city, white parents living in the inner city, they want school choice. If the Democratic Party, which purports to care about the poor and care about people of color, are adamantly opposed to it, what's up with that?
Well, every parent, it doesn't really matter your socioeconomic background, your racial background, none of that matters. Have you ever gone to a parent and said, you know what, I'd like to give your child more choice or less choice. What do you think? Every single parent is going to look for more opportunities for their child, and it doesn't matter their background, their race, or anything like that. So why are we not allowing the one thing in America that we know works best, which is freedom? Give parents the choice where to send their child using the same amount of dollars, or in many cases, even fewer dollars.
Yeah.
And education will improve. And as you pointed out a moment ago, education needs to improve. These NAEP scores that came out just a few weeks ago are utterly embarrassing.
I only mention urban parents, Chip, because if you've got some money, you can choose a zip code where your school system is probably going to be better than if you lived in the inner city. So it seems to me it is a disproportionately acute problem with urban America K through 12, which is why I mentioned it. Let's talk about the executive order that President Trump signed. Tell us about that.
Well, look, President Trump has probably been the best president in my lifetime, at least publicly, on doing this. And what he's talking about at the Department of Education is the beginning to take those dollars and block grant them back to the states so that the states can use those for things like school choice. And look, the Department of Education wasn't even created until Jimmy Carter created it. And since that time, spending has gone through the roof, test scores have gone down. So you can't make any rational case that the Department of Education at the federal level has done anything good. So let's take that money, send it back to the states, but more importantly, send it back to the parents so that they can choose where their child is best educated. This is not a difficult issue, and it's somewhat surprising that people stand up against this, because we're talking about the same money to be used for the same children for the purpose of education. Who should make that choice? The parent or some random mailing address where they happen to live?
Chip, I'm at a party a few years ago, and I'm talking to a man who happened to be a judge, Ivy League educated, and he was saying we don't spend enough on education in America. And I said, we spend more on education in America, public and private, K through 12, that I think all but 2 countries in the world, Switzerland and Luxembourg, if I'm not mistaken. And he said, you're wrong, you're wrong. So I got all the information, I gave it to him. He called up, he apologized. He was so adamant about this issue. He was clueless. We're spending a great deal of money, Chip. It's not the money.
It's not the money. It won't be the money. In fact, if you look at the recent NAEP scores that I referenced a moment ago, the Catholic schools who spend a lot less per student were outperforming the public schools, outperforming the charter schools, and outperforming most other private schools. So every parent intuitively understands this is not specifically about money. You need a good administration at the school level, like a principal and everybody below the principal. You need a good teacher, but you need discipline, you need rigor, and you need expectations. Children can learn when they're given expectations. If you walk into a school and say, you know what, you're from the wrong socioeconomic background. We don't think you can accomplish these things. Guess what? They won't. So give them expectations, hold them accountable, and children will deliver.
Absolutely. There was a study some years ago, I'm sure you've seen it, done by Fordham, where they asked government school teachers, I prefer that term to public school teachers, but government school teachers were asked who had school-age kids, where you send your own kids. Nationwide, around 10% of us have our kids in private school. Around 6% of black families do. 49%, Chip, of Philadelphia public school teachers who had school-age kids had their own kids in private schools. What does that tell you? It tells you that the people that know the school system the best aren't putting their own kids in it.
That really tells the whole story. And they had an opportunity, and in many cases, folks that are teaching in our public schools, our government schools, as you referenced them a moment ago, they have very limited resources, and even they are making the sacrifice to send their children to those private schools. Look, there is enough money in education. If you look at the hundreds of billions of dollars across the country that is being spent, it's usually the number one item in every single state budget in America. That money can be better spent. It can be better invested. You know, when I was a lawmaker in Georgia, we passed way back in the early 2000s, special needs scholarships, scholarships for children who had a difficult time learning because they had some sort of special need. We went back and we asked those parents, those children, and we looked at the test scores, and we found out the satisfaction rate was higher among parents, the satisfaction rate was higher among children, and the test scores went through the roof. And we were doing it for 60 cents on the dollar compared to what was already being spent. So we know this works if we'll just allow the freedom to flourish.
Let's talk in our remaining minute or so, Chip, about the Department of Education. Jimmy Carter set it up, as you know. Ronald Reagan in 1980 said, I'm going to do away with this new Department of Education. We don't need it. It's a federal thing. Education should be state and local. When he left, it was bigger than ever. Donald Trump has talked about getting rid of the Department of Education. Do you think that'll happen?
Well, I think we can start with the process of block granting, and that's what we at Job Creators Network have really talked about. That is getting the money back to the states, back to the governors, so that they can use it for things like school choice, if not exclusively for educational freedom, but taking that money and getting it back. And once that money begins to be block granted, I don't think you're going to see it tied up into these federal programs that clearly don't work, because the states will have found a better use for that money. You find an army of volunteers, which are called the parents, whose children now have a better educational opportunity, and they will not go back. It's kind of like back in the day going from dial-up to high-speed internet. Once you make that switch, you're not going to go back.
To learn more, educationfreedomusa.com, educationfreedomusa.com. Chip, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Larry, thanks for having me.
You got it.